Welcome to Recovery Corner, where the many pathways of recovery intersect. This is a space where you will hear personal stories of triumph in recovery, gain insights into various recovery-oriented systems, and learn how leaders across the country are building recovery-ready communities. The Recovery Corner podcast does not provide clinical advice.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Recovery Corner. I'm Carly. Everyone's probably heard my voice if you've listened to the podcast before. I work for young people in recovery as a national chapter coordinator and San Diego chapter lead. But we're not here to talk all about me. I have my friend Kevin Reed, the another national chapter coordinator who works in NorCal, in Reading as the chapter lead, and he has been gracious enough to give us some time to talk about some recovery stuff today. And he's a person in long-term recovery himself, and I'll let him tell you all about that. How are you doing today, Kevin?
Carly, I'm doing pretty good. As you said, I'm in Northern California, but originally Southern California. So I know it's doing great down there in San Diego, but we're doing good up here in Reading. Like she said, I'm the Reading chapter lead, as well as the Northern California chapter coordinator, national chapter coordinator at YPR. So Carly and I get to banter and brainstorm and solve sometimes together. So Carly, YPR, thank you for having me on. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I moved up to Reading, 5 years ago, about 2 years after I found recovery. I was down in Huntington Beach for 30 years and got to do treatment in Orange County, Costa Mesa. My journey has been essentially a journey of self-discovery, learning not that I'm just a person in long-term recovery or that I'm a person of faith, but I'm also Kevin. And I had no idea who Kevin was a lot of my adult life, as I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast can relate to, or maybe even currently relate to, right? As one of my partners and friends at one of my partner sites says, he calls it the daily walk of recovery. But yeah, it's been a great, almost 7 years now. And one of the biggest things I learned is my recovery has been let me start here. There was a note penned by my best friend in 2016 that said, Kevin, you cannot do this on your own. And it was a long note, right? But those specific words that might be, so you might think it's so minute and we have heard it thousands of times, but that one time resonated so much to me. And that was like the springboard to get me into treatment. A lot of things happened there with some of my really close friends who I lost. And ultimately, I said yes. I took ownership, which I never could in my life. I never thought I had a problem. Take that back. There was moments where I definitely knew I had problems, obviously, but pride and as arrogance, I suppose, and some of the things that can ultimately lead to a lot of downfalls in addiction. It's been a great journey, Carly. I've learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about feedback. I've learned a lot about blind spots in my own walk, my own mental health, my own characteristics, my own faults. I've learned a lot about attributes that I always had that were suppressed by substance use. I've learned about the kindness that I always carried when I thought I always hated people. And I just stuffed it with drugs and alcohol and became this angry, victim guy, But ultimately, I did find freedom, and it's been a great path. And the relationships I've created since I've been in the rooms of recovery and chosen this path have been incredible, right? I always say in my meetings that I feel like I've always been a connector of people, but I was stuck in so much shame a lot of my life that I was still in active use, and I still was that guy that couldn't get out, if you will, right? But what does even get out mean? So I say that a gift today is that I love people. In my addiction, it was that mantra of I hate people, because ultimately I hated myself during that period. So I'm stoked to be at YPR. I'm stoked to be able to bless my community with what I've received. I'm excited to always be around people who are looking for growth, right? We're some of the most resilient people in my opinion, walking the earth, right? People who have walked through active addiction have seen the other side. So there is hope. And I know Carly's a living testimony of that too, as are, hundreds of thousands, if not millions around the world. So thank you for having me on here, Carly. That's a little brief intro of me, Southern California guy living in Northern California. Surprised I don't have my Angels hat on. I got my YPR hat on today.
Fun fact, guys, if you're listening, I'm actually from NorCal. I'm from Sacramento, which is 3 hours south of where Kevin lives. So we kind of like switched places.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be in San Diego though.
Another fun fact. I was at a leadership conference, I don't know, a couple months ago, and they said there was a north and south side of the room. And they at a split second, they said, if you're on the north side of the room and you feel like you're supposed to be in the south, I need 7 people to go right now. And I hesitated because I was like, oh, am I Southern California or am I south or north? But that quick hesitation oftentimes can cost you. So yeah.
Cool. Something I was thinking about when you were talking about your recovery journey, just that came to mind, is like, we're young people in recovery, not young people in sobriety. There's a difference between, like, you talked about a lot about like self-growth and self-discovery and all of these beautiful things that were a result of getting sober, but not just being sober and being free of substances, but like committing to self-growth.
Yeah.
Piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Carly. You said, obviously said something key there, recovery and not just sobriety, because there's so much that comes with recovery, right? If we just say we were in active addiction for 12 years, it's not going to be a 6-month. Maybe people can, right? Maybe there's something crazy that happens to some people, but ultimately it's this, progress, not perfection model, right? There's this path that we choose to go on, right? We choose to go on. So I would agree with that. With that comes a lot of ownership and, personal responsibility. You hear it a lot with in certain pathways of recovery, that mentorship or sponsorship or guidance. So I think for me, that was a huge part of my recovery. And that when I first learned that other men and women actually asked for help, actually had the same problems as me, stuffed, racing thoughts, self-hatred, all these things that oftentimes we might think we're the only one in our own victim circle, and we complete this cyclical or continue this cyclical act, whether it's destructive thinking, destructive behavior, destructive relationships, physically destructive, obviously, to our bodies. Yeah, I really like that you said that, because ultimately I said yes, right? I know there are situations where there might be severe mental health that prevents you from ultimately making a choice. However, I do believe, in my experience, choice was a huge part of my recovery. And to this day, the smallest things I get to choose, right? Like in marriage, like I'm in the recovery rooms, oftentimes in the leadings I read, I talk about marriage, because while I'm still choosing recovery, a lot of my, let's say, problems or that I have currently, or not necessarily problems, but challenges of life, might not be that I can't put down the substance, but it's relational stuff. It's little things that trigger me, right? But now I choose into qualities that I've obtained through recovery, through my faith. I choose into qualities like focus, or I choose into qualities of personal responsibility, taking ownership of things I've said to others, right? And actually getting to have the closest people around me bounce that off me and give me feedback, where in the past it would have been shut off, anger, violence, or destructive behavior, and not having the tools to articulate how I was feeling. And ultimately that creates, I'd attract that too. So I wouldn't have healthy relationships. Whereas now I think that's probably one of the highlights of my life, is being responsible for my relationship and responsible for the people who I choose not to be in relationships with, whether because of its, maybe behavior that I can't be around, or for my own mental health, I choose not to be. But yeah, a lot of personal growth, and also a lot of not just one-sided, right? This idea always focus on me. You'll hear it often. I know you're a big advocate of it too. Being able to help others, being able to serve, um, being able to freely give what I have received. So it's both. Because if you stick in the only the mindset of the me, like always constantly looking inward, which is good, right? Especially, we're what are we? We're millennials.
Mhm.
Gen Zers, we have kind of, the pendulum has switched where we definitely, in a healthy way, have looked internally more than our parents' generations, which I believe is valuable, right? But sometimes if we stick in there, we ultimately can get stuck in our own stuff instead of kind of getting out of it by helping the next person or serving our community. So
Yeah. You said a lot of stuff that we could probably talk for hours about
yes.
unpacking as far as recovery goes, but I really want to hone in on what you said about like personal responsibility.
Uh-huh.
I think that like personal or honesty goes hand in hand with responsibility, especially in recovery. Like the first thing that we have to do as far as like choosing to be in recovery, you talked about choice as well, is like take responsibility for our own substance abuse, essentially, and like being radically honest with ourselves about the fact that like the relationship that I have, that you have, that we have as individuals is not working with substances like alcohol, drugs, etc. Like the first thing we have to do in order to kick off this journey is like have that moment of realization that maybe you've known for a long time and not wanted to fully own, or maybe you just realize in a moment something happens, like people get a DUI or they overdose or something like that. But yeah, like personal responsibility, self-honesty, how is that contributed to your recovery? I know it's a broad topic.
Yeah. There's a lot there. Thank you for asking those questions. I'm, as we talk, personal responsibility is big. Choosing. So going back to when I was in recovery, or I still am in recovery, but early, and making that choice, I remember going to AA when I was really young just to please certain people, because to stay in certain areas, to live in a certain situation, that was part of my program. But I didn't do it for me because obviously I didn't think I had a problem, right? I was able to have jobs. I was able to, I'd get fired, or, I got fired from multiple jobs for being under the influence. I'd go to the next one, right? I was able to go to essentially what I thought looked like have it together. So clearly that was not the case, because every time I've ever been in trouble was always related to substance use. So when I talk about that personal responsibility and choosing in, for me, ultimately looked like taking ownership that I actually had a problem and I actually had people that I hurt. I realized there was things I wanted in life. However, I was just not confident enough to choose into it. I remember even when I was younger, there's nothing wrong with being a busboy. However, if you're being a busboy because of lack of confidence to talk to people, in my case, that was it when I was really young. I chose that. I chose to not pursue healthy relationships. I chose not to hang around certain people that I know would be advantageous to my growth, because ultimately I didn't have that wherewithal or that compass to know that. So however, I did choose. But in recovery, I think for me, it was taking the responsibility of knowing that I had an issue, knowing that I was aware of it in my family lines. And however, I didn't know a lot of it was in my thinking, or, some people will say it's your genes, or, if you go to the disease model, but a lot of it was in my thinking, my lack of self-worth, my compulsive behavior, my compulsive gambling, whatever it is, I was just going all in for it. And that can be used for a lot of good things today. done with the right heart posture and mindset, right? So yeah, I think that ultimately the big overarching theme is that I took accountability and responsibility to know I had a problem, and from there I was able to receive it because I was open.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the basics of my recovery and a lot of people I talk to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I mean, it's like it kind of like opens the door for a whole new way of thinking, like when you humble yourself, I guess, enough to like
yeah,
admit that. And you have to admit it to yourself first. Like I always say when I'm like working with people on their recovery and stuff, like you can lie to everybody. You can lie to like your mentor, your sponsor, you can tell them and talk the walk all you want, but until we're completely like honest with ourselves, like you could lie your way through your whole recovery. And I think some people do that to please other people, which, I mean, everyone is on their journey, and like, not to say that lying about some things, like, I mean, it's definitely not great, but maybe that's what somebody needs to do at the time. But yeah, like I think having that, like, to me, like if you've got, as we call them, like a reservation, if there's something in your head that you're holding back and you're not being honest about, like just say it. Like there's someone around in recovery circles who is safe to tell these things. And unless you say it, like that's, like they say, our secrets keep us sick. We got to say those things that are lurking in the dark corners of our minds. Like, even if you're not sure, if you're completely in exploratory mode of your sobriety or your recovery, and you're ashamed to say that, if you keep holding that in, like there's no way to break through. It's kind of like there's this saying, everything's either on the table a part of our life or under the table ruling our life,
yeah. I like what you share about, like, you're hinting on honesty right there, openness, honesty with yourself and with others. And you mentioned secrets. I believe secrets are, things that destroy yourself, marriages, people, hidden things, right? That just kind of hide and create so much conflict, and you live with all this trauma, unresolved conflict. So yeah, I love what you talked about, honesty. I the smallest things, like apart from addiction, substance use, the smallest things were like, I would say, I don't care. That would be my tagline. I don't care. I'm good. I'm fine. Like, I don't care. It was like this masquerade. And I would have actually thought I was a real person back in the day, because I didn't care to tell people I was, I'd get super emotional. I'd cry a lot, or, when I got super drunk sometimes. I was just that guy. But I vividly remember always saying, I don't care. I don't care. And that was this like programmed into me, my mindset around life. And I thought I was being honest with myself, but in reality, I had so much insecurity. I cared so much what people thought. If I was in certain situations, oh my gosh, like I couldn't be around anybody, certain people, not under the influence. So was that real honesty by just saying, I don't care? Probably not, right? To this day, like every human being, I think, cares to a degree how they present themselves. They want to present with honor, or they want to, value themselves. But my big thing was, I don't care. So I like what you said about honesty. Not only that, knowing, honesty about your problem with substance, your problem with thinking, your problem with people, your problem with anything, right? I had problems with all things said above right there. But I think the honesty, now that I look at it today in my current life, is being honest with the way that I'm outwardly showing myself to the world, and honesty to myself, how I'm showing up daily in the small things to the people I serve. So my family, my interpersonal relationships, or you call inner circle, and then ultimately from there, I guess it'd be like work, community, and less formal relationships. So I think that's the big one too. And when we talk about honesty and personal responsibility, the idea of having those people, whether it's your sponsor or whether it's maybe it's a faith leader, maybe it's a YPR chapter leader or a chapter member, to expose yourself and allow yourself to be vulnerable enough and honest enough to have those people in your circles that will call you out basically on your crap. And I think that's been a huge part of my recovery, because constantly I'm hearing from the closest people to me that, maybe you're a little prideful, or I'm sensing some arrogance right now. I can operate like that sometimes when I'm not at my best. So it's crucial and important to have those people around you. And then ultimately you take that feedback and take a reflection and go, wow, I do have some blind spots. And that's where the honesty in my life I see right now often. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of started to get into a little bit like beyond just the early recovery piece about like initially getting off substances, but then like how responsibility, honesty, and all of that is so important as we continue to grow as individuals and like work on our pride, work on our self-esteem, work on showing up to life as better human beings. And again, like I could talk about this all day or try to hammer it home because I think it's that important. Like we have to practice it for ourselves. That's why we talk about like radical honesty, radical personal responsibility, because it's like in everything we do, like turning the mirror back on ourselves and like looking at, why do I feel this way? Why am I behaving this way? Why is such and such and such and such giving me feedback about this, or things aren't turning out the way that I think I want? For me, I found a lot of freedom in doing that. Freedom and like being able to take responsibility, because then I can change and make my life better, and make myself feel better.
Yeah. Carly, what is your definition of radical personal responsibility? Radical, tubular, gnarly personal responsibility.
Gnarly. That's why they call me Narcar, just so you all know. I mean, like for me, it's kind of like what we've been talking about, but it's like for any situation or any little emotion or feeling that I have that like I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel good, that feels off. I try to check myself, sometimes better than others, better at it than others. Like sometimes I want to hold on to being pissed off at somebody for something or whatever the case, because it feels good for a little bit to be angry, but end of the day, like those things just make me sick. Like they make me sick, and like we all know, or maybe not, maybe we don't all know, but like the things that like make me sick in my brain are the things that are going to make me sick physically or make me do things that are addictive patterns that I don't want to do, or potentially relapse if I held on to those, so like I mean, like honesty and like little things in work, even like, am I doing my best at my job that I can do? And that's something that only I can be honest with myself about. Like, if I'm not living up to that standard of I'm doing my best, not overstressing or overburdening myself, but doing my best in a balanced way, like I know that I will feel not good about that like in the long term, and like that's not something I can afford to do anymore or harbor, because like I feel they say this too in recovery circles, like the path gets narrower. And I feel that's kind of what they mean. Like we learn these lessons in our recovery and our sobriety sometimes, where we find out that our old ways of doing things, like they don't work. It doesn't work. And so there's only really the one path of like truth, radical personal responsibility, and honesty that actually works to be happy and have serenity.
Radical truth, peace, honesty, serenity. Yeah, I love a lot what you said. I think when I was in my addiction, clearly none of that, well, I was going to say none of that would have been possible, but it could have been possible. However, like a lot of it is, I believe, like awareness of all these little things, how you were talking about even showing up, or kind of the choosing in to kind of manage the the thoughts or the subconscious lenses, the little things that run our life, oftentimes negative cyclical thinking that ran our addiction. So kind of being aware of that, allowing people in your life that can expose it, and then taking responsibility for it. I'll give you a good example right here. I value health and what I put in my body and eat, but I would always say certain things that my actions didn't line up, like eating all these snacks at 10 o'clock at night. And I'd talk about how I was on this road of like not doing that. And then I'd always do it, right? It was completely opposite to what my brain or my value system for that particular moment or season of my life was telling me. So personal responsibility for me looks like actually being responsible to what I'm talking about with my wife and my inner circle, whether it's my recovery or my health, and taking ownership of that. It's something so simple, but it's those little kind of lies, or you were talking about being honest with yourself. Like, am I actually living this honest life that I talk about? Now, I have a little more time that it's still about all the things I learned at day one, but it's oftentimes those little things that I think about in my life that, have nothing to do with about addiction or recovery in a sense, but they have everything to do with addiction and recovery in a sense, right? As we talk about often, showing up in the small things is how you show up in most things. So I love how you even talked about work there.
Yeah.
Honesty, being honest with ourselves.
Yeah. I'll just finish out with this, like those feelings that maybe at one point in our lives or in my life, that I maybe used to hide from, those areas of myself that I wasn't being honest with myself about, or like things I didn't want to face, maybe some fears or self-esteem issues. Like those are all the reasons that I drank or did whatever my addictive patterns were. I've had multiple things throughout my life that I've been addicted to. I was using addictions to run away from the real root issue, that if I would have just faced those fears head on with honesty and taken responsibility for my feelings and for my actions, and for like my traumas, even if I would have just taken responsibility for those, I wouldn't have had to be addicted. And that's like what recovery is today. It's like taking back the reins, taking back the power, for me anyways. And yeah, it's a lifelong journey.
Like that, taking back the power from, hear me now, from victim to victor, right? We've all been, and oftentimes still do at times, the most victorious people still operate with some sort of victimhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like how you said that, from taking back the power. And ultimately, yeah, I think that's kind of been, that's a good tagline. This has been taking back the power from when we felt so helpless or powerless, right? Certain people say powerless. And I love that I get to be a victorious, powerful, focused, compassionate, humble, courageous man today. I say that because it's part of a affirmation I've been doing recently, but I'm a focused, courageous, humble, compassionate man that is responsible, right? Because man, I love recovery. I love people, right? We hinted at that earlier, that I used to hate people. And I'm excited for life and to have a family. And so personal responsibility and honesty is just some of the highest things that I value to ultimately live the most fruitful life. And love it. Love recovery. It's been less laughing than normal, more in depth. But it's been a good talk, Carly.
Yeah. One last thing, my last question for you, for anyone listening, what is one piece of advice that you would give somebody seeking recovery or in recovery? You gave a bunch of advice indirectly today, but one thing you would say to a young person in recovery.
A young person in recovery. The one thing I would say, wow,
you only get one. Just kidding.
One thing. I would say that I what's coming to mind, that analogy that I said, if it took 5 years to form all these habits, addictions and negative thinking, it's not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. So I would say have grace for yourself and surround yourself with people, Victor people, whether that's a mentor, sponsor. So I would say, yeah, have a grace for yourself and surround yourself with incredible people, because it's not about how. If it was about how, what? We would all be happy, skinny, whatever you want to call it, rich. So it's not about how, it's about who often. So surround yourself with amazing people. And if you, whatever your pathway of recovery is, if that's AA, if that's faith, if that's mat treatment, surround yourself with people that are carrying what you want to ultimately walk out in your life. That was 2 things, by the way.
That's right. Super awesome. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me today. You guys, if you need resources and you made it to the end of this podcast, first, congratulations. I hope we were inspiring. Second of all, youngpeopleinrecovery.org. We've got fun events happening all the time, and all recovery meetings every Wednesday that you can tune into no matter where you are in the country, the national arms, as we call them. Check it out. Reach out if you need support. Peace.
Yeah, I'll plug Carly's surfing events too. She does fun events down in sunny Southern California, San Diego, Norte de Mexico. I love SoCal. So thank you, Carly.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.